The problem with close grip pressing for chest development, whether we're talking about a close grip push-up or a close grip bench press, I see too many people using this exercise thinking of it as either a chest movement or, more commonly, a tricep movement. I'm here to tell you that most of the time it's an anterior delt movement, and here's why. So I've got these balloons attached to show the pec and the delt. This pec in particular looks a little problematic, but let's go with it. What I'd like you to try and see is the fiber direction of these guys. We can see that the pec primarily has fibers running more horizontally and the anterior delt more vertically. The upper pec is sort of somewhere in between those two things. Now, there is an extra feature here that's worth bearing in mind, and it relates to the size of this rib cage. When this arm starts coming back behind, hopefully you'll be able to see some of that there if I can hold that in position. The pec here wraps around the rib cage. So it's not pulling straight in this horizontal direction. It's pulling from this point in that direction. And so if it's pulling on a diagonal, then it has a component that is forwards and a component that is sideways. So as the arm comes back behind us, yeah, this now wraps around. But depending on the sternum angle and the thickness of this rib cage, and therefore how proportionally behind the body the arm gets when it comes back behind a person. If this rib cage actually came out to here and this arm pulled all the way back, relative to the back of their rib cage, it might only get to here, which is really different than if someone has a thin rib cage and their arm comes back to here. Why is it different? A force angle. And that force angle is always taken from a lever arm. The lever arm is the shortest straight distance between the point of application and the axis in question. And then we measure the force angle from that. Well, when this arm gets really far back behind a person, especially with a thin rib cage, that force angle gets really narrow. The amount of rotation it's capable of producing decreases massively. Maximum rotation of any force applied is always applied at 90 degrees. That provides the maximum amount of rotation around an axis that a force can provide. And as that force moves away from 90 degrees, it becomes less effective at providing rotation and more directly then produces linear movement, translatory movement. So back in this position, that pec doesn't rotate around here as much as it wants to shove this guy forward. And that's very different for someone with a thicker rib cage, a steeper sternum angle, because how far their arm gets back behind them is really different. So we can have two conditions where this wrapping around of the rib cage, I'll try and angle it, where it wraps around and pulls in that direction. So it does provide some forwards travel, is still really different between someone with a big old thick rib cage and someone with a narrow rib cage. But with that in mind, let's park that and think of just this guy here and the direction of travel for these fibers. So we have a force pushing this arm back in this direction here. This means we have an axis here through this guy like that this arm is rotating around. But if we push that back, who's in a position to fight a force trying to push us that way around an axis through the head of the humerus? Hopefully you can see it's clearly the vertical guys, the anterior delt is best aligned, followed by a little bit of some of the upper pec, and last of all, these guys. And the only reason these guys can do anything in this position, for this guy, they can't do anything, right? There's no wraparound for this guy in this position. In this position, all of the fiber direction for this person and this rib cage goes in that direction. It wants to pull the arm in and adduct it. But we have a force coming in this way. So how useful are fibers that pull in that direction at fighting a force coming in that direction? We mentioned they can a little bit because of the wraparound of the rib cage, but that's going to depend on the person and their arm position. And in this position, at least, these guys can't do anything. They're pulling in the wrong plane. So it's going to be an anterior delt challenge, obviously. If we wanted to create a challenge for these guys, what do we have to do? This guy has to come out to here. And you'll probably see it start stretching. Hopefully the tape stays on there. In fact, you can definitely see it stretch because it pulled clearly off. The line of these fibers wants to pull that back in there, provided we have, by the way, this is the same axis. This looks like a different axis, right? Because my finger is here. But if I keep it attached to the same point in the humerus and pull the humerus down, you'll see it's the same type of axis. The axis is relative to the joint position, so it's the same axis. But now, if a force pushes back this way, well, these pec fibers can pull against that force back towards here, or they would if I hadn't ripped them off of the arm. You'll also note in this position that the upper pec and the anterior delt are still in line. The anterior delt now, rather than being vertical as it was here, now provides a horizontal pull. And so the reason you'll see a lot of people don't recommend doing extra front raise work is that the anterior delt gets plenty of work every time we do any pressing, whether that pressing is done in this position or this position or this position. The only way we can really take that guy out would be to Botox it paralyzed. So how about the triceps then, when we're doing a close grip press? Well, if we're here and a force pushes back and that force goes straight through the line of the elbow, then there is no rotation challenge to this axis here. There is zero. It goes right through it. That means this line of force pushing in this direction. And look, I'll do it. I'm the one providing the force. How much is the elbow rotating? It's not. The elbow rotating is that. So I need a force that would do that. In fact, gravity right now will do that. But a force that is translatory in this direction through this line provides zero torque to the elbow. Zero torque. It provides a big moment, however, to the shoulder. And again, to this axis as it goes through this position. So if we do a push in this place, it's not really tricepy unless we've got a crap load of friction we haven't accounted for. It again comes back to this guy. If we want to create a challenge for the triceps, we need a moment to the elbow, a rotary challenge to the elbow. We need something that would cause rotation of this joint. And the triceps want to extend the arm back down. So that challenge must be something that is wanting to pull the arm up. It wants to pull it into flexion. Because I could just use gravity in this position. I don't need any tricep output. I can hit myself in the dick. So what we're going to need is a force. Now let's say we've got a force pushing through this hand. And now it's going to push through here. Well, there's going to be, let's say his hand is on the floor here. And he's done a push-up, but he's done it to that position. Well, in this position, if the floor were made of different material, let's say it was made of ice, his hand would likely slide upwards, right? It'd go shoop and slide in that direction. So if his hand wants to slide up, and if the floor were made of a different material, or your hand was made of a different material, it would, but it's not on the floor that you're on. That means there must be a force of friction that is stopping you going in that direction, which means it needs an opposing force. So the force of friction must be in that direction. So if we have a force pushing on the hand this way and another force pushing that way, well then we have a resulting force that's going to come down in this direction. And so we can follow this. And this guy, let's assume he comes down through here. Well then my perpendicular distance, my moment arm to the elbow, is going to be something like that. And if I follow that same line back up, my perpendicular distance to the shoulder is going to look something like that. So in this position, with a made up amount of friction, and having not moved or accelerated or done anything else, there is a challenge now to the tricep and still to the anterior delt. I can't take that guy out, not in this type of movement. But again, we come back down to here, there's no rotation again. That's just this guy, and possibly some of this guy depending on the structure of the person. While we're here, we may as well mention that the position of the scapula is going to play a role here too. If that scapula comes round, now his can't because they're screwed on, but let's assume that it could come round because you stood in this position. Well then the glenoid, the socket that the humerus sits in, is going to come forwards and round. And that's going to be akin to bringing the arm closer to here. So these are again going to be more horizontal. So depending on someone's thoracic position and their scapular position and structure and control, that's all going to play a role in exactly who fights what, but this is the overall picture we're dealing with.